Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Death by Adaptation podcast, a bi-weekly book club where we choose one classic book and compare and contrast it against its cinematic adaptations. I'm your host, Nicolò Grasso, and I'm joined, as always, by the great Ewan Gleadow. How are you doing, Ewan?
You know me. I'm feeling quite like the main character of the book we're going to talk about at the moment.
You're feeling wonderful, I guess.
My back
Full of
aches.
life and joy.
Everything hurts. My teeth feel weird. I ate an apple earlier, and it's just, I don't know. At least I sound different. I got a new microphone.
Yes.
So, delightful.
The sharp, crispy quality.
Amazon really screwed me around with that. I had to order it twice. So
Yeah, what happened? What happened the first time?
I ordered it, and they're like, it's going to be here tomorrow. It's like, great. That's what I pay for Amazon Prime. And then it didn't show up. And I was like, all right, lads, what's the deal? So I messaged them, and they're like, it'll be here tomorrow. It's like, okay, you said that 2 days ago. It's like, right, no worries. I'm a very impatient man. And they text me. So I ordered it on the Tuesday. It was Friday. And I said to them, look, lads, what's the deal? And they're like, not a problem. We've cancelled your order. I was like, what? It's like, oh, we cancelled the order. It's like, thanks for letting me know. So I just ordered another microphone, the exact same one, from a different seller. It was like £5 more expensive, and it got here the next day. But then I got back home today from a walk, and I've missed my other order, and that's just gone straight back to the post office. So now I don't get to listen to Leonard Cohen on vinyl anytime soon. So
dang it.
It's been a grim week.
An absolute pain. But as you can hear, it's not just me and Ewan this time around. We have a lovely guest, the incredibly talented Cordero Meznarich. How are you doing, Cordero?
I'm doing wonderful, thank you.
Yeah, we're all feeling great. We're all feeling great to be here. Great to talk about a very family friendly, wholesome, inspiring novel. But before we continue, as always, a strong reminder that if you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts, on YouTube, on Spotify, wherever you're listening to us, because I know you're listening to us, hey, leave a 5-star review, leave a like, subscribe, follow us, whatever rocks your boat. We accept you. We're happy that you're joining us on our wonderful, disgusting journey. So, without further ado, let's talk about Filth.
Ah, Bruce, I hear you have a pain, yes?
Oh, a pain indeed, Doctor.
And would this pain be one of your physical pains, yes?
No, Doctor. My other kind.
Well, the final destination of the pain recovery train is self-help via abstinence, Bruce, eh?
Already booked my seat in advance. Super saver all the same.
No more cocaine and chips suppers for Bruce, eh?
Oh, those items were previously favourites of the detective sergeant. Of course they were.
What of this promotion, eh?
A mere formality, I'm sure.
Only champions can rewrite history, yes?
Yes, I've always believed that it's the winning that's important, not the taking part.
Only winners are more attractive to the opposite sex, Bruce, eh? Like our successful friend here, the tapeworm, yes? Who do we trust, Bruce?
Why, no one, of course.
Not your friends, not your family, not even yourself, Bruce. Especially not yourself, eh? Now, about that pain, yes?
Filth is a 1998 Scottish novel written by Irvine Welsh, maybe pronounced Irvine. No, none of us are sure about that, but it's fine. And Welsh is more famous for having written, as his first book, Trainspotting, which was adapted in the Danny Boyle classic movie starring Ewan McGregor. And after that, he ended up becoming a kind of a household name, especially in England, for his writing, which is very much centered on the life of people in Scotland, on the working class, and it focuses on substance abuse and a whole bunch of very, very tough subjects to approach. And the way that he approaches them is with a smile and a lot of straightforwardness. And this brings us to Filth, his third novel, actually. And this book tells the story of D.S. Bruce Robertson, one of the meanest, most brutal, uncomfortable cops you will ever follow in a piece of literature or any media, honestly. He's working in Scottish police. He's abusing drugs. He's abusing his own power. He's abusing everyone around him. And it might seem like one of those novels that is very meandering. It's very loose, but actually there's kind of a mystery that grounds everything in here, because the book starts with someone murdering a black man in the streets. And it kind of works as a mystery in that sense, because Bruce Robertson and his um, fellow police officers, they have to discover who the culprit is, who killed this man, what happened. And meanwhile, you're just following him around on his adventures. But the more the story goes on, the more secrets are uncovered from Bruce's past, the more horrible acts he commits, and the more you're just transported into this world of pure filth. So, Cordero, what are your thoughts on this book? Just unleash everything you have to say about it.
Well, the first thing I have to say, because it was Ewan, right, who he loves this book and recommended it, and he's why we're reading this.
Yep.
I'm so sorry.
You need psychiatric help, my man, because that was one of the most rancid things I've ever read in my entire life. I mean, and it rocks. Like, it was fantastic. But and me and Nicolò got to talk about this while we were reading it, just chit-chatting every once in a while. But you can't go like 30 pages in this book without just needing a shower or something. You're just like, I feel gross just absorbing this whole thing. But there really is a great sense of mystery, especially, if anybody's gonna be sold on us talking about this book, they should not look up anything about it. They should go in as blind as possible, because I'm sitting here going, this is going to be a nice, neat detective story, and we get into this crime, and then we follow this character who seems to not want to solve the crime at all. He seems to just like almost not absent-mindedly. He's very purposefully avoiding everything about this, and it's really fun, because I think while you're reading it, you assume he's just an awful policeman, right? Like, he's just so bad.
Yep.
But as you kind of uncover the mystery, you start to realize that he is doing a lot of these things on purpose, and he is very mischievous. He's very much of a hypocrite. That's something I really liked about Bruce, is his inner dialogue. He would say something about somebody, and then moments later he's doing that almost exact same thing. He is just, I don't know. He's probably one of the most interesting literary characters I've ever read about, if I'm honest. And just this whole thing was just an insane read, and 400 pages that flew by, honestly. I love it, but I don't know how Ewan could recommend this to anybody, because I can't recommend this to anybody, without just saying I'm sorry in advance or something.
It's like a massive asterisk. It's like, read it at your own risk.
Exactly.
So, Ewan, what's your history with this book? Just why do you love this book? Tell us.
So this is the first Irvine Welsh novel I ever read, and I watched it at the back end of my second year of uni, going into my third year, back when I was trying to read more. And I remember finishing it, and I thought, this needs to be shared with friends. I wrongly assumed that a lot of people would want to watch this, so I kind of, it was like the dinner bell that I would ring all the time. It would be, you need to watch Filth, you need to read Filth, and everybody would go off and watch and read Filth, and they would come back and say, what is wrong with you? I remember in my third year, I was in charge of movie night. So we'd watched Alien the night before, and it was my turn to choose. And I chose Filth, and we had guests round, we had people that did not know me, and we all sat and watched Filth. And everybody enjoyed it. They didn't think it was the nice quiet night in to pair with the Domino's pizza we'd ordered. Turns out people want to watch Enola Holmes more than that. But
jeez,
yeah, I've watched Filth quite a lot since then, and I know a few of my friends do like it quite a bit. I think a lot of it appeals to me because it's the peak of Welsh for me. I've got a Welsh shelf over there of all
Wow.
of his paperbacks and stuff because I'm a really big fan. But Train Spot and Marabou Stalk Nights, they don't hold a candle to Filth. Filth is incredible for a lot of reasons, and I'm sure we'll get into them. Like, Cordero was mentioned with the main character, this anti-hero who's equally pathetic yet also extraordinarily interesting to look at as a failure of a system that he believes in. Um, it's a book that just unravels so nicely and so well that it's hard to keep track of everything that's going on. There's so much going on in this book, and as it flows, as it develops, as it brings out more, it never feels like it's overloading its plate. It never feels like, well, okay, come on now, that's a bit much. It always feels like there is progression for the sake of it, and the new avenues it leads itself down makes sense. And I think a lot of that depends on Welsh's ability as a writer, his ability to almost break the fourth wall quite a lot, which is, with the tapeworm, I'm sure we'll talk about that. But also to make this person who is just utterly detestable actually quite likable, which is no small feat considering the actions Bruce takes part in. I think if you were to take the first third of this book and say, here you go, you would come out of this thinking, what a horrible guy. And then by the time you get to the end of it, you still think, good grief, what a character, what a nasty man. But there is also an underlying sort of theory along with it to say, well, this is actually a product of his past. It's a product of how he treats himself as well as others. And I wouldn't go as far to say that it's an actual absolute rundown of how bad people can do good things or good things can happen to bad people, that sort of thing. But it does push that. And it pushes it to the point of it's the twists and the reveal towards the end of it where, it's great. It's so great. And it's amazing how quick Irvine Welsh manages to sort of not forgive him, but say, well, actually, this has happened as well. So maybe we should take that into account. It's very interesting how he's written it. I think to me as well, obviously, coming from the UK, I'm not from Scotland, but I have visited a couple of times.
Very
it's
close,
about accurate, yeah. It's about right. No, it's I think Welsh gets away with playing on Scottish stereotypes quite a lot, because they're just so universally accepted. Like, if you look at the film adaptation, for instance, or you look at Trainspotting, or you look at other films that have adapted Northern culture, it's pretty prevalent. We all love a Greggs. We like our books fast. We like our drinking. That's about it. And I think depending on those stereotypes really helps with the more outlandish occasions, because the outlandish stuff is, it was dabbled with in Trainspotting. I don't know if either of you have read that, but there's some nice little vignettes in there that just are removed entirely from the movie that would have made it feel a bit more like Filth. And considering this is meant to be unadaptable, whatever that means, I'd say John S. Baird did a pretty grand job. And that's not bad.
Yeah, we'll get to it. We'll get to the film. We'll get to the film. But just speaking of the book, I have to agree with everything both of you have said. Honestly, it's a trip. It is very distressing. That's just how I was feeling early on. It's kind of like, Jesus, but Bruce Robertson is horrible, and I'm not feeling good reading this book. Like, I was reading it a lot while commuting. Just kind of like, I don't feel I should be reading this in a public space. Like, this is not right, because it's graphic, it's gnarly. When I mentioned that this is written entirely in first person, so you are living the thoughts of Bruce, which plays into the hypocrisy that you mentioned, Cordero, which works so well because he becomes such a richly complex character. He's not black and white. He's primarily black, but you can tell that there's some lightness in him. That he was kind of a good person in the past. Maybe he does want to do good, but it's almost impossible for him to achieve it, and he can only blame himself ultimately, because there's always the possibility of choice, and that's something that I found very fascinating in this book, because you have a lot of characters that always have to make certain choices, and you can see it in his fellow policemen that have all like a lot of different side stories. We'll probably get to a couple of them at least, but ultimately they manage to surpass their flaws by making the right choices. And Bruce never does. And he knows what the right choices are, but he avoids them constantly. I think the closest comparison that I found with another character was the Lieutenant in Bad Lieutenant by Abel Ferrara. It's a similarly just substance abuse cop who wants to redeem himself, but ultimately can't, which is very dark and also the only possible way that this can end, which I find very, very fascinating. Or just the writing style in general, like you've mentioned, like it is very colorful. It is very, I wouldn't necessarily say fun, but it is very easy to read, despite using a lot of Scottish English and Scottish dialect from Edinburgh. It's the first few pages were rough. I'm not gonna lie. I was just reading. I was like, what does tay what? But then once you start actually reading all of the sentences this character speak very quickly in your head, you're like, I get it. Oh, okay, okay, I know I get what they're saying. It's such a fascinating way of writing. But I think the most distinct thing that Welsh does in this is the tapeworm. And for the listeners who don't know, basically, Bruce Robertson is sick. Well, he's sick in a figurative way, but also in a
sick in a few
literal
ways.
he's sick in a few ways, but also he's literally sick and very disgusting. There's some like he has problems in the downer regions. Let's just say that he should get looked at. It doesn't apply the proper ointments as he should, but he also has a tapeworm inside of him that's just eating away in his stomach, and he's always hungry, he's always eating, and he's always feeling like garbage after eating. And this tapeworm has a conscience, and he actually starts taking over the book very, very slowly. And you start seeing, at first, it's just numbers, it's just lines of zeros that enter in the center of the text. And then it's just eat more. And then it starts developing just this conscience, and he starts talking about himself. Oh, I'm very happy to please the host. Just keep eating, just keep eating. And then the tapeworm actually delves into the past and history and thoughts of Bruce. How do you guys feel about the tapeworm? Probably one of the most unique characters in if we can call him that.
He's a
in
beautiful
literature.
character.
Such a
It's my
beautiful
favourite.
tapeworm.
It's a very smart way of detailing a backstory that the main character is
Mm.
not going to tell you through a first person's perspective. I mean, you see that later on with the encounter with Amanda Drummond when she's like, "You need to get some help," and he's like, "Nah, I'll be right, pal." The only way of getting a backstory like that out of a character is to have the character tell it, but not at the same time. So if you've got something that looks like the character and is actually an active participant in the character, probably the best case scenario is actually a tapeworm to tell that part of the story. You cannot have the big bust up of Bruce Robertson going, and then this happened in my childhood, because that just wouldn't make sense. It would not. It would go against everything the character stands for. But you also need that information. It's crucial to understanding Bruce Robertson as a character and why he interacts the way he does. And to give it to the tapeworm is fantastic. It sort of circumvents the need to have Bruce react to those situations. There's no emotional conference with it. There is no sort of register or even an encounter with it. It's just the tapeworm speaking of its own volition. And I really like the detail of Welsh has actually written what Bruce is doing. And around that, you can kind of get a feel for what's going on. It's fantastic. It's really good. And I think the build-up for it as well is fantastic. And then later on in the book, every now and then, instead of Bruce Robertson writes we with the tapeworm. And it's such a small change that's done intermittently. And it's just the sign of a very smart writer. It's very, very great. As far as the tapeworm goes, I think it's that, and I suppose the counterpart for the film would be The Doctor with Jim Broadbent. And it's not a bad switch. I think for the book especially, the tapeworm's phenomenal. It's really good. It's the only way you can get that detail out of a character that is so reserved and unwilling to speak about. You know, he's a macho stereotype. He's the hard drinking,
very toxic.
Yeah, very toxic, very old form sort of living policeman type thing. You're never going to get that detail unless there's some major breakdown. I mean, even when he does have the breakdown at the end of the book, there is no detail given. There is no admission of guilt. There is no sort of Well, there is a bit, but it's not Bruce speaking it. It's actually Bruce apologizing to someone rather than confronting it himself.
As I say, Bruce has, he has no reflection. He doesn't, like, in a sense. So, and especially, I can really understand why, you'd want to reread this book. I think it just would give you so much. Especially, I mean, I just was flipping through the prologue a little bit ago, and it was just like, so much is actually given to you in that prologue, but you just can't see it because of how it's all laid out. So it's really interesting to just have this character who is so unapologetic, I guess. Like, he doesn't care about his actions. He doesn't care about like how it hurts people. He's living moment to moment. So yeah, to have this kind of parasite, especially towards the end. And one thing I love is that the parasite, like towards the end of the book, is just writing so beautifully, and everything it's saying is so, it's so beautifully written, and it's almost jarring because we're following an actual person who's just saying and thinking the most disgusting things. He can't walk by a woman without, oh, I love to stick it in her ass, or, whatever. And then you have this parasite who's living inside of him, and the parasite's like, Bruce, it's all because of what happened to you when you were a child, and you never got over these sort of issues, and they were always living in you, and you tried to work around it. And, me and Nicolò were talking, because I finished the book late at night before I went to bed, which was such a mistake, because I was stuck in bed just thinking about those last like 30-40 pages, just like, oh my God. Because yeah, I mean, everything that Bruce does, I don't know, it is just like we get this theory, we get this kind of lore of this character that explains, again, all of his interactions. His love of music is explained, which also, that's something I love about Bruce, is he's disgusting about everything else, but when he starts talking about, I don't know, Phil Collins or something like that, he's just the nicest person. He's beautiful. You're reading it, you're like, this is a different book all of a sudden. He's just so enthused about this. But yeah, just those last few chapters, you were just, I don't even know, you're just in focus, I guess, of this character that you didn't realize you were never in focus of. You thought you knew everything you needed to know about him. He's just a vile, disgusting human being. And it is just very interesting to kind of come back through and see again just how he ended up this way. And like, even things like the Beast, they're so interesting when you compare him to it's mentioned early in the novel, and you're like, wow, this actually, again, everything, when I was reading it, it seems so easy to drop off on information, because you're going through all these kind of incidents in his life. And yeah, just to have that explanation, that's something you don't get very often, I think. Any other book would give you that kind of information early on. You wouldn't get that at the end, which makes it just the way it's like layered, I don't know, the way the information comes across and is revealed to you is just so damn interesting. Like it like the other night when I finished it, I probably spent like an hour just rethinking the entire book with that context. And I can't tell you another book that's necessarily done that to me. And that's one of the reasons I'd say this is probably one of the best books I've read. It's because it's just, I there's nothing like this, honestly. I can't compare it to anything, like, rightfully, and it be a true comparison.
Yeah, it's an incredible tightrope balance that Welsh pulls off that I was not expecting. It would have been so easy to just demonize Bruce as a character, or to make it seem like he's trying to justify his actions, which would have been even worse in a way. But what surprised me the most out of the backstory is that ultimately it is needed. There are a lot of books that I've read, movies that I've watched, where I'm always kind of like, less is more. We don't need to know everything about their backstory. It doesn't really add anything or change things up. In here, it changes everything. It really does. And one of the turning points for me that showed there was something deeper in him as a character is when he tries to save the man who has a heart attack on the street. Just kind of like living his life, and then just this man drops to the ground. wife starts to scream, little son is right next to him, and Bruce just rushes over, tries to save the man, and he's unable to do that. And he keeps thinking, like he's haunted, he's properly haunted by that body, by that situation. The wife keeps coming back to just thank him and tells the son, oh, see, that's a good man right there, that's a good policeman right there, you see, that's a good man, try to save your daddy. um, and he keeps thinking like, oh, everyone's asking me how did it feel, how did it feel, it just felt horrible. Didn't feel good. And then you understand, oh wait, he did what he wanted to do and should have done when he was younger, to save another person, to save this girl that he was dating pretty much. And she died, and it's just the trauma that's piling on top of him. And it kind of works with it's interesting because it becomes so specific that we've said it many times before, but again, it's so specific that it becomes more universal, and it gets you thinking about yourself, your own past traumas. How you try to like not think about some things because thinking about them is not healthy. It doesn't make you feel good, and that's the same thing Bruce is doing. It's like, none of that happened, I'm just living my own life, I'm very happy just doing drugs and going to prostitutes and stuff. um, and ultimately, no, he kind of has to deal with everything that happened in his past, but he never managed to let go of some of the trauma and to embrace it. And so he's just ultimately explodes, which I find very interesting about the ending. And let's talk about the ending actually, because I don't know about you guys, but actually, I don't want to say I figured out the twist, let's say early on, but I kind of like the book opens with the prologue where it's just first person writing, someone's beating to death a black man. You're like, what? But I was reading, it was like, oh, damn, this policeman is starting out with killing a black man. Jesus. Oh, and then he has to investigate it? Huh, interesting. And after a certain point, I thought, wait, was are we? Wait, did it just add the connection between the two things, or is it intentional? I was like, okay, no, it is actually what happened, but it's played off as a twist. The fact that he is the one who killed him, which I found very interesting. I don't know how I connected the two between them, but another interesting thing is that we talked about the tapeworm, which is the only other character that kind of can spout exposition and backstory regarding Bruce. And that's very fascinating because you have throughout the books these small chapters where you have Carol, Bruce's ex-wife, who's just remembering her husband, and oh, I'm going out tonight. Oh, but men just look at me, they want to touch me, but the only one that can touch me is Bruce. This great man, lovely man. It's like those chapters are written in a very different way. They come kind of out of nowhere. Where is this going to? And then you get to a point towards the end where it's like, oh, this is going to the point that it's Bruce who believes that he's Carol and he's actually dressing up as her and he was going out on the town. And everything that she said in those chapters is his own, like, it's the way that he kind of wishes his ex-wife actually saw him as. I don't know if that sentence makes sense, but it's very fascinating. So let's just talk about that. Carol, the ending, the fact that ultimately, like, he everything crumbles around him, and he commits the ultimate act of just leaving the world in a very tragic way because he's doing it just as maybe Carol, maybe the wife, the woman that was the husband he tried to save. They're coming to his home, and they will be greeted by a grim image. Yes, how do you guys feel about the ending? And all of
It's
this.
it's a gut punch.
Mm,
There's no way you can absolve a character like that. So the only thing you can really do is, bump him off. Um, a lot of the great part for me with this series of twists is that everybody knew that it was him dressing
mm,
up as his wife, and that they just accepted it. And I think it's Toll, the chief, Bruce's boss, who's like, "Oh, everybody knew. We just thought let him crack on," which says more about the other characters than it does Bruce.
yeah.
For the whole book, we're reading along as if Bruce is in control of his surroundings and other people, and for that to be turned on its head as actually these people are just playing along. It's such a swerve, and it works quite nicely. Um, as far as the actual ending goes, it's so frenetic and very fast. there's a lot going on, and considering, you know, we read at our own pace, it's mad how quick Welsh manages to get things across. I think it's the only way you can get rid of a character like that, and he has to be getting rid of. You can't have a character like that receives any form of a happy ending, because it would feel like not just ill-gained reward, but also like an unfitting end. You know, where can that character go? He is at the lowest ebb. But
Right.
he can't bounce back from that. It's like, oh, well, I'll pick up the pieces. Because if he wanted to do that, it would have been 300 pages ago. So you've got to bump him off. And I think they do it in a way that is responsible, because, you know, it inflicts more damage. And that's what he's done for the whole book. Welsh has written a character that damages people, whether he likes it or not, over and over again. And in his final act, it's rather, not ironic, but rather telling that his last act is to harm someone that's at his front door. And in doing that, you get both sympathy, but also the sort of complete picture of who Bruce Robertson was, which is great. It's a lot harder to do that than I'd first thought with writing. I think for all I enjoy Trainspotting, a lot of the characters are quite open-ended, but I suppose that comes from you just dropping into their lives briefly. But even then, with the closed-off vignettes, you're never given clarity or reason for their decision making, and when you don't always need it, it is nice to have it, especially when it's as interesting as Filth.
Yeah, beautifully put. Cordero, any thoughts?
I don't know. That was beautifully put. I don't know if I can add anything to that.
Same rules apply, lads. Let's get going.
Jeez. Oh man. But yeah, I think a gut punch is a good way to describe it. And just pitiful as well. That's kind of what got to me. It's just like, this man was trying so hard to be the coolest one around in all the senses of cool, just like level-headed, more clever and dastardly. But then the ones around him that he was always hating on, most of them kind of cared for him in one way or another. They all cared for him, which is kind of like the last thing I want to talk about with the book. At least it's the characters. What a cast of characters! There's so many memorable people in this book. Any favorite in this cast? I know, like, personally, I really like Toll, the inspector chief. Like,
Toll's fantastic.
Superior is writing a screenplay in his free time, and it's reflecting on what's kind of happening in the main story, which is very fascinating, because Bruce, of course, among the many horrible things he does, he steals the script on paper, thinking that he deletes the files on Toll's computer in the office, and he picks up the manuscript and he just starts burning one page after the other, but he also reads a little bit of the script, and he's thinking, oh, wow, this is actually enlightening. How does he perceive me, and how does he perceive other people in the office, because he's clearly putting them in the story. why am I burning the script? I shouldn't. Maybe I should just read it. It's very, very fun, very interesting. But yeah, some of your favorite characters in this story.
With that Toll interaction, I love how absent-minded he is about that, because like that screenplay, that script, it seems like that would have given him so many answers, right? Like, it's so much of that is based off of him that he would know what's going on, but he just doesn't care about reflection or anything like that. So of course he's never going to read it. And he's such a bastard that he just has to destroy. Every time someone's happy or they're doing something with their lives, he just has to backstab them, destroy them. If a friend is happy with his wife or his girlfriend, Bruce has to get in the way of that. Like, he is just this like conduit for destruction in Scotland, pretty much. It almost really makes you wonder how anybody could possibly be around him, but he is charming in a way, and he is clever in a way, and then he is just so brutish and gross. Like, I also, something I love about the book is the imagery and just how gross, like, it just gets exponentially grosser and grosser. The smell, the rashes, his apartment, the stains on his clothes, like, you're just going, and it never stops. People are bringing it up every time they come around. They're just like, hey, there's something smelling weird. Hey, this place is a little nasty today. And it just gets worse and worse. And then when he's after that incident, and he's like stuck at home, and he can't really properly take care of himself. Not that he was at any point during this, but when he like truly can't, he is just living in his own filth, like the pigsty, honestly, which
Yeah.
makes something from the movie quite interesting. Something the movie chooses to do.
I
That's
used to
not
live
in the
with
book.
someone at uni that was like that. Just absolute disgrace.
Jesus. Oh,
Oh
no.
yeah, it was grim. I would walk in from my lectures and it would just stink. You could smell something was off. And
What?
a few months into living there, we asked them to take the bins out, and we thought they had. And a couple of weeks later, the stench was still there. It's like, oh, something a bit odd coming from that cupboard. He just dumped all the bin bags in the understairs closet, and we opened it. Just takeaway boxes fell out. It was grim.
God.
It's unbelievably disgusting.
It's a hoarder right there.
But well, yeah, but
Jeez.
not in a communal flat. Jesus. As far as main favorite characters go, a lot of credit has to be given to Welsh, not just for the style of writing and how he makes Bruce Robertson at the same time this devilishly horrible person, but also someone you can sort of relate to almost, is the actual use of typography and how he lays things out, how he actually adapts the book itself into something that can be utilized as a learning tool, essentially. The font changes, the lack of speech marks, which I love. I love the lack of speech marks. Welsh does it for all of his books. Well, I think, the ones I've read, and knowledge is porridge. Everyone should read. But it's very prevalent. It reeks of his style. And when he gets into like the really gritty, horrible descriptions of like a rash developing, or like Robertson going out and just like even the food he eats, like when he's talking about something similar like a Kit Kat, it sounds really grim because we know what he's been up to previously in like the last few pages. It's like, how can you go from that to having like a Kit Kat and a crossword? Nah,
and he's never washing his hands.
Oh no, not once is it mentioned. Considering how in depth and detailed Welsh is with his actions of hygiene, the lack of hand washing is upsetting.
That's a choice.
It's a choice. It's a bold one.
He's always eating Indian curry as well.
He is, yeah.
Oh.
And I think that smacks of the irony of Bruce Robertson as a character, this horrible racist and misogynist and just someone that's such a lowly person. And it's ironic that his desires are the things he hates most and that he's actively trying to be against. Not to be part of the lads and like the group, but just because he's a horrible person.
Mm-hmm.
And it's I think the film does it a little bit differently, but it's more or less the same effect of you get an understanding of why he's like that. It doesn't excuse the actions, but you know what his line of argument is, even if it's not even an argument, it's just horrible. But at least you have that understanding, where a lot of films like that, or adaptations or books or anything, are going to leave that open-ended for an audience to just go, this is a bad person, and rightly so. But to actually have that reasoning underlining it is fantastic. And a lot of that comes from people like Clifford Blades. I think that's, hands down, one of my favourite characters in this book. I think Robertson's probably my favourite character. Clifford Blades.
Yeah,
the man himself. The
Bless
man
him.
with the 3-inch glasses. Oh, what a guy. And I know we're going to talk about him in the film, so I'll reserve my comments on Eddie Marsan's performance until then. But man, that guy had some 2013.
Man, yeah. Oh,
But yeah, I think Clifford Blades. I think I think the cops as a collective, because essentially they all represent one thing or another. Right? Ray Lennox is the rising champion. Gus is that idiot guy. Amanda Drummond is essentially the token woman for Bruce to berate and then figure out that he's actually wrong to do so. They all work in symmetry with one another quite nicely. That works all well and good. I don't think there's any characters outside of that Freemasonry group, because obviously Clifford's in that as well, that actually rotates enough around the story to matter a lot, other than the wife of the widow, essentially, and her child, because that has the importance of interspersing humanity. It's got little nuggets of wisdom where it's actually Bruce Robertson was a good police officer when he was in Australia and with his wife and his happy family. He used to be good at his job, and this has happened, and this has happened, and it's piled on, and eventually he's just collapsed into sort of a shadow of this vaguely stereotypical Scotsman who's running around drinking and doing drugs and all sorts, and it's a capitulation of something that I argue that he wouldn't have even gotten into had that spiral not occurred. By the sounds of it in the backstory we're given, he's a tragic character. It's a genuine, like, you know, Filth's a very funny book, but good God, there's a lot of tragedy at the heart of that humour. And it's dark comedies are nothing new. Irvine Welsh did not invent that, but what he did do was make it sincere. There is no way of escaping that in Filth, because it's not layered on heavily, but there's enough of it to think, oh, good grief, you know, there's that much of it.
Yeah, it never pulls any punches.
Yeah.
Speaking of pulling punches, let's dive into the movie, shall we? Released in 2013 and directed by Jonas Baird. Baird? Yeah.
Jonas Baird, yeah, he did that Stand and Ollie, didn't he?
Which I haven't seen, actually. I'm a disappointment. I love
It's
Stand
no
and
filth.
Ollie. It's no filth. It's probably less filthy as well. I can only imagine.
Well,
But yeah, this movie was long in development because, again, Trainspotting was a massive success. Everyone wanted to cash in on Irvine Welsh, but his books are very, very hard to adapt, it turns out. So much so that Filth was considered unadaptable, and I can kind of see that given the whole, like, first person, well, not only just the first person writing and the tapeworm sequences, but just the content itself. It's so graphic, so disgusting. It goes into, like, it has pedophilia, basically, in a very explicit moments. It has animal cruelty and animal abuse. Bestiality, that's the word it has as well. So, you know, that sequence is funny, but also, Jesus, I was like, oh, it's going there. Oh, no.
The lead-in is so traumatizing, and then it pays off in the funniest way. You're just like, all right. Like, well, I thought that was going a lot worse.
It's the best way scenario. The way it
honestly.
But yes, but ultimately they managed to make it in 2013. And it was starring James McAvoy, some might say in his career best performance, but also a cast of other very, very famous British performers. You have Jamie Bell, Eddie Marsan, Imogen Poots, John Sessions is in this, Jim Broadbent, Kate Dickie. Like, it's a very stacked cast, you know. I distinctly remember watching the trailer for this when it came out. I think it was the Red Band trailer because it was very explicit, and thinking, wow, that looks like a very funny movie. But I never watched it. I just never got around to it for one reason or another. So I'm glad I watched it for this. But before I share my thoughts, Cordero, how do you feel about Filth, the film?
Well, I think that a lot of my and I messaged you a little bit about it, but initially I thought, you know, a lot of my enjoyment as I was watching it was because I read the novel. But honestly, I do think that just kind of puts like an accent mark on the enjoyment. Like, you really understand what the movie's hinting at, you know, what it's kind of, well, at least what it's trying to hit. But at the same time, I don't know, I really respect what that movie does, because reading that book, I'm just like, how is this going to transplant into a movie? Like, how is this going to work? And the way that they figure out how to make it work is just, I don't, impressive, honestly. I think if I had to pick a simple word, because the book is like it's almost like a train wreck, but it's in a book form, right? So you're like reading at your own leisure, right? So I got to one of the craziest parts of the book, and then I ended up having to go do errands. So I stopped it and I went and left, right? That's what you can do with that. The movie feels like a car crash. And it's not in its 90-minute runtime, like 97-minute runtime. It doesn't hold back at all. But I mean, besides what it has to, from, you know, obviously it has to lose a lot of that material from the book.
Yeah.
It has to lose, you know, we don't get to see Bruce try and have sex with, you know, 10 different women. It cuts it down to, you know, 2, 3, I think 2.
2.5.
Yeah, 2.5, which is fine, because I mean, yeah, you can't include all of that. And a lot of the ways that, like, I mean, I think my biggest disappointment is that, you know, you can't do anything with the parasite like you can. We talked about it a little bit. It's the doctor, but it doesn't really have the same impact.
No.
But at the same time, there is like such an obvious style going on with this movie. And I think it's not quite hitting everything that the book hits, but we're getting to the same destination. We're covering kind of the same themes. And honestly, having James McAvoy play this detestable person who I imagined was like a bald fat guy, like I couldn't stop imagining Bruce like that, to having such a beautiful man portray this, I was like, this is never gonna work. But good God, you know, McAvoy killed it, really impressed me. The style of the movie really impressed me. The ways that they got to the point, I guess, without having to go through the same way as the book, was cool and really good. Honestly, it impressed me. I was so flabbergasted by it that after I finished it, I was like, I have to sit down and actually think about this a little more than the book. Because I finished the book and I was like, that's amazing. That's fantastic. I love it. And the movie, I'm just like, it's hitting something else. It's more fun. I will say that. It's definitely more fun to sit down, mostly because it's 90 minutes and you're done. And you're not really, I think the biggest problem anybody would have with rereading Filth is you just like, oh, I have to get to this part again and go through this. Oh God. Oh, she's 15. Oh, I can't.
Oh, no.
You know, oh, his rash. Like, it was really nice not having to think about the rash around his groin and stuff like that.
Yep.
So I mean, it's the best. This is the best you can get. Like, honestly, I really think that if you tried to hit closer to the book, no one's going to enjoy it. It's going to be too gross, too visually gross. And the way it's done has a lot of style, has a lot of, like, it's just like fun, just oomph, you know? Like, I could watch it again right now. I don't know if I could read that book again. I don't know if I could pull that book out and start it all over again. I'd really like to eventually, but it's a little much for sure.
Yeah, the film is definitely a lighter watch compared. It's much more of a proper dark comedy. Personally, I wouldn't really classify the book as a dark comedy. It has darkly funny parts to it, especially early on. I mean, it is more of a proper character study drama to me. Very disturbing one at that. But the movie keeps things very, very, very fun, very light, very colorful as well, very stylish, as you mentioned. But yeah, Ewan, gush on this film. This is your time.
Wow, this is what my career's been building up to. The blue tip, the Daily Star. None of it matters. I get to talk about Filth.
Yeah.
I've watched this film 5 times now in the past 3 years.
Wow.
What year is it? 2020. Past 4 years. Past 4 years. I've watched this film 5 times. Nick, with me and you were speaking just before this started. My year so far has been a bit messy. It's been up in the air, a lot of it, and I think it's made me a bit unhinged. So I'm just going to go out on a limb and say Filth's my favourite film. That's it. It's not Annie Hall. It's not Stop Making Sense. It's not Brazil. Sod all that. It's the film where James McAvoy sees himself in a mirror and he's got a pig mask on because he hasn't taken his meds. Fantastic. Knocked it out of the park. Having said that, there are some undoubtable flaws with the adaptation. But every time I think, well, they've cut out the Hillsborough rant, they've cut out Jim Davidson, they've cut out this, that, and the other, these little spots of encouragement for Bruce Robertson as a character, you always go back to thinking, this could have been a lot worse in different hands, because, and it reminds me of the adage that Gus Van Sant must have had when he adapted Psycho of, someone else was probably going to do this, why not me? I'm surprised at how much John S. Baird manages with this film, considering, you know, in the limited supply of films he's done, he did Cass before this and Stan and Ollie afterwards, and he's helming that Tetris movie. You don't really get much of a scope of his work, really. You know, people talk about, like, the great directors, Werner Herzog, David Lynch, you know, they have presence because they have a style. Baird's style seems to be just adapt the book, we'll see where we go. and it's very quiet and it's very observant. And what happens is you get a film that manages to avoid all the dangers of plot holes and of adaptations, because rightly so, this is unadaptable. This is insanely difficult to adapt. And the issue and worry on my mind always when I first watched it was, well, I mean, I hadn't even read the book, first off, but I think that did help. But looking back on it, it's kind of like they could have adapted the tapeworm. They could have thrown that in a lot more than they did. They could have adapted more of the sexual encounters. They could have adapted more and more and more and more. And actually, by just doing a lot of really just little nods to camera for those that have read the book, but it also makes sense for the audience, and it doesn't exclude either group. It makes so much more sense. You know, like the farmer who sells them pornography in carrier bags, and then the big blowout in the book is just disgusting. I reread this book in between breaks at work, and I got to that bit again, and I had to leave it for a couple of days because it just really turned my stomach, and I read at my lunch. So watching the film back and knowing who that character was really is now an exercise of, and then that happens in the book and that happens in the book. But because it's missing from the film, it's not an unadaptable thing. You could have adapted the tapeworm speaking to the audience. You could have adapted Tom Stronach, the football neighbour. You could have adapted the farmer and the dog and the bit with the prostitute. But they don't, and I think the real they should have. Yeah, that's the real. No, I think
star.
The real positive thing is that it knows when to draw a line, not for decency's sake, but for the sake of how much can an audience really handle. If you're adapting this and this horrible event and this horrible event and this horrible event, and it's telling that it was an active choice, not just to use the imagination, which lends itself to adapting things like the tapeworm, but to actively avoid it and just shoehorn it in at the end. It makes more sense. Because if you've got a film that has a tapeworm talking to you and a copper that keeps seeing his colleagues as like, the one I'll always think of is towards the end of the film. You know, at the start when he's doing like the tally and it's like 10-1, 6-1, and you see the guy dressed as Hitler, and then way later down in the film, he's dressed as Hitler again, but this time it's like a vision of someone he's having sex with. Horrifying. But even then, that little moment, it links back to the book where two characters were adapted into one man. It's a fantastic performance. It's those little edits that break the fourth wall. It keeps Welsh alive in a similar sense to Trainspotting. I feel like Filth has to avoid that Trainspotting mentality of if it goes to be too disgusting or too filthy, it's going to just get tied to, well, it's just Trainspotting, isn't it? And I kind of get that. You can't have Bruce Robertson going into all of this sort of grim environments and disgusting places, even like the dirtiest of locations, right at the end when he's in the abandoned factory. It doesn't feel like it has much presence, not because it's like not meant to, but because it doesn't feel all that filthy or dirty.
Yeah.
Because the obvious comparison there is just going to be, oh, that looks like Trainspotting. And the way of getting around that for Baird is to heighten these characters' comedic abilities, where you've got Ray Lennox firing his face into a big pile of Scarface-level cocaine. That's his introduction. Or you've got the guy doing a Nazi salute, but it's closer to John Cleese in Fawlty Towers than an actual adaptation of Nazis. And Baird really does understand, and I think McAvoy does as well, where you're adapting really sensitive stuff. Just explode it. Just blow it up to the point where nobody can think anybody is going to take this seriously. Make it completely comedic. Just throw everything you can at it.
Yeah.
While also understanding that to throw too much is to essentially ruin. It's a perfect balance. Mm-hmm. It's so balanced between the story and the darker undertones. And I think a lot of that, like I mentioned earlier, was through Clifford Blades, who is essentially a punching bag for much of the book. And in this actually has some redemption to him. Yeah. It feels like a more fleshed out character where, I watched this film with my dad once, and he said the funniest scene was the bit where they're in Amsterdam and he's dancing and he's dropped the pills in him. But that comedic scene of everyone's laughing at Eddie Marsan dancing around with two gay men with lights on him, that intercuts immediately to he's having a bad trip and he's screaming and it's starting to trigger Bruce Bruce Robertson's flashbacks and stuff, and
Mm.
it's so well handled, and it's that balance flittering back and forth, or even just having two in the same location that really works. Like, there's a lot of nice nods that'll make sense for people that have read the book, but for those that haven't, they're not going to get lost off. Toll, being a scriptwriter, is adapted with visuals. He's got a giant 2001 Space Odyssey poster. He's very secretive about his readings of like how scripts work, slamming it into his desk. That stuff really works. And you get a feel for the character even without learning anything. Because really, Toll is just the old man that is Bruce's boss in the film. In the book, he's a man with aspiration, but you can't fit all of that subtext into the book, into the film even. It's too much of a good thing, and they've realised that, and they've said, no, that's enough. Jim Broadbent can have a small supporting role rather than taking on this big amalgamation. But what a role!
That's more than enough in small doses. Like, imagine having him throughout the movie. That would have been a bit too much.
It would have been too scattershot.
Yes. Honestly, hats off to John, our friend John. John is buried. Because he also wrote the script to this. Like, he directed and wrote it by himself. He did a brilliant job in that sense, but because for all the reasons you both mentioned, just he knew what needed to be in the story and what needed to be changed. He managed to adapt it as well to more modern times, because I want to say the book doesn't take place explicitly in any, like, I think it is set in the late 90s, very generic, or like mid 90s.
Like around the late 90s.
But the movie is fairly timeless for the most part, I'd say, which is also very effective in my opinion. It doesn't have, I don't know, topical jokes or references to iPhones or anything like that, because they're not needed for the narrative. So major props for that. But just in general, it just works because of the runtime as well. It would have been so easy to have this be 2-hour movie that just slows down to a halt constantly for one reason or another, but instead it's focused. What is the book about? It's about this cop who's breaking down. Let's just focus on that. We don't need all of the detours with other characters. We don't need all the various prostitutes. It's just like, you get the deal. You get the gist of what he's doing. He's doing lots of drugs, having lots of sex, and just everything else is confetti. You don't need it. And I like that. I think McAvoy is brilliant. You can tell he really
so good.
cared about his like. Ooh, he shines. I've always really liked him, honestly, since he was Thomas whatever in Chronicles of Narnia. Iconic.
Of course,
in the
Absolutely.
cinema, just kind of like, great.
About that.
How can you forget? It's the greatest role.
Because I've not watched it since I was 6.
How old? I think it was like 7 or 8 when I watched it in the cinema. Yeah,
Came out in 2005.
Yeah.
So I'll
I
be
was 10.
5.
Oh wow.
good old days. Childhood.
Back in the day when I had no worries.
When I hadn't read Filth.
It
just-
was good back
5-year-old
then.
read this. Good grief.
Every preschool should have a copy of Filth for the creative minds in the classroom. But yeah, it's a very effective movie. I really I have to the way I was watching it, I have to agree with you, Cordero. I was having a lot of fun with it, but I was also thinking, man, probably just having read the book is influencing my enjoyment of this movie, because I'm filling in all of the gaps. And that was very, like, it worked in the moment, but just thinking about it and like listening you and as well talking about the film, it's just kind of like, yeah, it is effective, but it's not the book. And I kind of think that it is missing that extra darkness, extra layer of just, not even to be edgy, but just the fact that it's 90 minutes long makes it incredibly entertaining to watch, but it does lose some of the like character study elements. Not just for Bruce. Like, I think Bruce works as a whole. They do avoid the backstory pretty much. They just kind of hinted it throughout, and there's
Right.
the psychiatrist at the end who explicitly states some things like, "Yes, it's your dead brother that you let die." Yes, but it's very quick. It's serviceable, I'd say, all of that stuff. But I was a bit sad about the side characters, because outside of Clifford Blades, I think Eddie Marsan, wonderful. Just the casting in general is great in this film. But everyone else feels a little bit kind of one note. they don't have much to do because it is the James McAvoy show. Like, that's the thing. I'm very conflicted about it because as a whole, it works really well and it's very entertaining. I cannot deny that there are problems with the adaptation itself, but it's also like it makes me enter the side of yes, but this is borderline unadaptable, and this is the best case scenario, like both of you said. Like, it's very hard to pull it off, and it does work, and we're blessed that it works as well as it does. Which is yeah, sorry.
I mean, if you look at sort of the scripts that Irvine Welsh has actually had a hand in, I was going to say, he recently wrote creation stories, and I checked, and that was over a year ago. So just to put my brain into the time frame there, that's where I'm at currently. And that was terrible. It had all the components that makes Welsh's work good. It had the guy that played Spud, Ewan Bremner. It had all the imagery and the messaging that Welsh often conflates in his books, and that was exactly the issue with it. It had everything his book should be, and they tried adapting that letter to letter, and it does not work. You have always got to give or take with Irvine Welsh. I mean, the great omissions that Trainspotting makes is about half the cast of characters and a good chunk of the detail. With Filth, I think most adaptations inevitably are going to lose something. They've got to cut something out somewhere, and then really it comes down to assessing how well it works without that structure. And for Filth, it's very much the James McAvoy show. We're extremely lucky that he's up for the task. We're very lucky that he actually feels ready to do that, because it's a hard role to play, and the sympathy you can feel for that character towards the end relies a lot on his physical performance. The sort of bedraggled sort of... Is that even a word? Bedraggled?
It is now.
Sounds about right. Yeah.
Bedraggled. I meant like... what did I mean? Like, he just looks like shit, essentially. He looks awful. And he's trying to save face still. It's like, I'm undercover, when he's got like a tin of the good stuff in a Tesco somewhere. Cuts all over his face after falling out a window. And it's true to character, like in the book, he's just trying to soldier on through and not change his mentality or his observations or his reading of the world around him. And I think in both instances, there is a lot to draw from it, with whether it's McAvoy just storming through everyone. And I feel like Filth as an adaptation, it focuses more on the actual plotting than it does on the breakdown. And then the breakdown seems to be a counter-product of the plotting against his colleagues rather than some long-form build-up. Because a lot of the... I suppose it's through the flashbacks and the sort of visions that he has. I'm glad I don't have visions like that. I just get black spots on my vision rather than like seeing dead children or like pigs, I just get
Hitler
vision blurs,
Visions of Hitler.
Oh god.
sounds like an awful poem.
It sounds like a riff on Bob Dylan's Visions of Joanna.
Jeez. Oh.
But that is, I will concede that the movie loses a lot of the backstory. Through no fault of its own. It's very hard to adapt to film.
Yeah, it is so very enjoyable. That's probably the best thing I can say about it. It's so fun. It's so fun. And they surprisingly use most of the scenes from the book. Like there's very few moments that are original or just kind of heavily changed compared to the novel. Even the Carol character works really well, and they play it as a proper twist in a much more clear way than the book, because the book is, I want to say, it's more of a surprise twist, but in this one it does feel like it's leading to some things. Like, okay, what's happening here? This is going somewhere. Of course, we all knew what was going to happen, but
Of course.
if you're watching it for the first time, I can see yourself, because it looks very different. It has this like strong, like high contrast cinematography, and the color palette is very weird, very cold. So it's, yeah, I can appreciate it being more of a proper comedy as well. It ends with a very surprisingly delightful and wholesome cartoon. I want to say maybe even hand drawn, which is a good way, because you're reading the book and it's like, Oh my god, last sentences you go, geez, you just put it down and go, fuck, whoa, that's heavy. But you're
Yeah,
watching the film and it leaves you with a smile, you know. It's
you
like,
gotta have
yeah,
the chaser to the series of shots that are just followed. You
yeah,
gotta have
exactly.
something to lighten the mood.
You know,
And also,
viewers laughed throughout, so
and McAvoy's last line in the movie, like at the end of the book, it's so pitiful. You
mm,
feel you feel pretty awful for what's happening. And you know, what is that last line of the film? It's like it always was going to be like this or something like that. Like, you know, it's just you're just like, yeah, this was always going to go to a dark,
Yeah.
morbid place. Like, can't change what you can't change. Like, and that's it. And then it ends, and you're just like, cool. Like, but also there's one thing that's really interesting about the movie, and I understand why they did it, but I mean, they kind of changed the crime, right? Like, they don't
mm,
make Bruce the the racist that killed a black man for having an affair with his wife, which is also funny in itself.
yeah.
And he brings up that he's just like, yeah, I'm banging everything that I possibly get my hands on, but my wife cheated one time, and can't let that go. And
He's a
it's
family man.
he's a family
Truly,
man,
yes.
exactly.
Family
But yeah,
comes first.
but yeah, really, it works in the movie. I think they really needed to pull back on that. Like, I mean, obviously Bruce is still just as racist, just
Mm,
as sexist, you know, just as much of a piece of shit, honestly, as he is in the book. But I think leaving that part out works a lot more with like the kind of dark comedy aspects of it. Like I think if they include that in the movie, you're gonna really dislike this character that's pretty easy to dislike. But without having it, you know, you can still like him for all of his faults. You still enjoy him as a protagonist, antagonist. I don't know, both, I guess.
mm.
He is kind of the antagonist of this world of his
He's
making.
his own antagonist.
Yeah.
um,
Ugh.
in a way, this is not too different from when we talked about way back in the second episode of the show, American Psycho.
Yes,
No,
I was going to bring that up. But
it's the same. It's not the same, thankfully. But you know, you have the book that's very dark, very graphic, and there are some parts of it that you just cannot justify in any way on purpose by design. But then you're watching the movie and it's much funnier, much cooler, and you have Christian Bale just smiling. It's like, yeah, you know, he's a cannibal, but you can kind of like him, you know. Same
The
thing, kind of.
ATM wants you to feed it a stray cat.
You just do it, you know, just ready to shove it in at first.
And he points that's one of my favorite parts. He points the gun at it like, I'm gonna force this thing in.
Just shoot it in the head. And kind of the same thing happens with Filth, you know, because the novel, it's again that's something that really hit me is, yeah, they changed the fact that he didn't commit the crime because that makes him kind of more likable and tragic for general audiences, which might seem like a cop out, but you would lose it. Like, I can see, you know, cinema score and all those ratings just plummeting. It's like, what?
Mm.
You've made me kind of like the likable racist cop because he actually killed the man. They also changed him from black to Asian, which was kind of like an interesting choice. I don't know the
yeah,
reasons behind it. It was like, fair enough.
It,
Minority still for
it, it,
Scotland.
it's almost like they're like, you know, people are really upset about, like, you know, racism against black people, so let's change it to like Asian people, which is more acceptable or something. It is really odd. It is like, I'm like, why is the
Yeah.
change for this? And then it's just as racist, and I'm like, I don't know. Who knows?
Yeah, it's a choice. It's a choice.
It's an interesting one.
But again, like it works to the end of the adaptation. It works, and it does. I want to say it's like a blood cousin of American Psycho, because they're both very fun, very light, much funnier than both books. Um, Repeating most of the scenes, but removing all of the ones that wouldn't be approved by any studio ever. No
Mhm.
actor would ever do any of those scenes. Um, but it works. It really does work. It's kind of nice, you know. Yeah. Anyone has any last thoughts about Filth the movie? Something you want to get off your chest?
it's a great Christmas film.
It is a stealth Christmas film. You're right. Yeah, lots of
It
Christmas
really
songs.
is.
It is one for the family. Like, I could take that Blu-ray downstairs now, see my mum, dad, and my brother, say, "Come on, lads, we're watching this," and they go, "Not a bother."
Everyone gathering around the Christmas tree come the 24th of December.
I don't think Anthony's going to be a fan of that one.
How about you, Cordero? Any last thoughts?
Yeah,
Speechless.
yeah,
He's
almost.
speechless.
Just about as speechless as I was when I finished the book. Just want to sit in darkness and think about my own life. Just like think about everything I've ever done that I've like felt remorseful about, and just go, really, it wasn't that bad. Thinking about it, like,
Puts things under a different perspective, doesn't it?
yeah, it really does. It really does.
Also, last question. Ultimately, what is better, the book or the movie of Filth? Cordero, why don't you go first?
It's the book. I think it has to be the book. I mean, we've talked about the difference between the book and the movie, but you know, the book is it's serious. It carries its concept it to the extremes. Like, you don't see, and I've talked about, I've never read a book that does it the way Filth does it, the way Irvine Welsh kind of chose to approach this. He's always pushing the boundaries. Every time I picked up that book, I thought, well, I got through the worst of it, to come across the next 40 pages, which just,
It's like, oh,
again,
no.
it just got more and more worse. And then, like we were saying, the movie it's just funner. It's lighthearted. It's got James McAvoy. I mean, it's so much fun. Even though it's not, even though when you think about it, it shouldn't necessarily be as much fun. But yeah, I think the book left me speechless. The movie, I watched it and I was like, what a fun, joyous occasion. And I whistled as I walked away, you know. The book left me in complete shock of silence in the dark of my room, trying to go to sleep, just going over it piece by piece and just being like, what did I just read? What did I just experience? Like, I had to register it. And I think, like I said, that's what made me appreciate it the most, you know.
Nice. Yeah, one is a feel-good movie, and the other is a feel-bad book. How about you,
Absolutely.
Ewan?
There's something rather beautiful about a film where you can both see a cartoon pig dancing along a street to Love Really Hurts Without You, and just 20 minutes before, see just depravity and degeneracy and unsalvageable conditions. You get to see Eddie Marsan throw up into his face.
That's such a good scene.
You get to see Eddie Marsan dancing around Amsterdam. You get to see this, you get to see that, you get to see all sorts of horrendous acts. It's beautiful. But the book's better.
Aww.
The book, look, the film has got a genuine place in my heart. I have fond memories, not just of the film, but the people I've watched it with. But the book is better. I think it's because it's my favourite work of fiction. That's an unbelievable achievement. I think back on a lot of the books I've read that I've considered my favourites, like Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep or The Spy Who Came In From the Cold. And they're monumental books, but I've never read a book that has made me feel truly moved or feeling for a character that is completely deprived. You know, I mean, like, take something like The Green Mile, for instance. It's very easy to feel sympathy for the right characters and hate for the awful ones. With Filth, it's hard to know where the line is drawn because there isn't really a line. It's a book that, I mean, the characters around Bruce Robertson are not as bad, but they're still bad people. They're just not highlighted. If you put the spotlight on another one of those characters in that book, they're going to come across as horrible. They're either going to come across as self-centered or vacuous, and that's sort of signified in the film a little bit in the opening. But in the book, it feels more fleshed out, like all books do. But I think the big thing for me with the book is how it actually uses text, not in a, oh, well, I'm reading sort of sense, as in a genuine, font and style and effectiveness of actually using typography, of actually putting it in bold or breaking the text, having it obscured by something else. It's just very smart. It's very good. Yeah, probably my favourite.
Question. Have you read the spiritual sequel that is written?
Is that Crime?
Crime, yes.
I've not, no. Because
Ray Lennox.
Just to link it back to the start, those bastards at Amazon sold out the day before I bought it. So no,
God.
I didn't.
Amazon hates you.
They do. And I pay good money for Prime. I've got a coffee subscription. I don't know if you can see, there's a box over there. It's full of flat whites. I get 40 every 4 weeks, and it's not enough. I was thinking of doing it every 3 weeks, but I think that's too much coffee. That's like 3 a day. That might be enough, actually. Anyway, they're adapting Crime into a 6-part series.
Ooh.
And it's gone very quiet at the moment, but it's meant to be coming out soon, actually. It's gone, like, quiet as in, like, we should pull the plug on this sort of thing. But no, it's out soon, apparently. Yeah, which is surprising. It does look pretty good. I think with Welsh, it's... I'm really keen to read more of his work, but with Welsh, I do think it's very much he's defined by this and Trainspotting, and has lived on that for quite a while, because all he does now is spin-offs of said text, which is fine, because more the merrier. But I've never spoken to someone and they've said The Acid House is their favourite Irvine Welsh novel. Or rather, short stories, isn't it?
Well, actually, Crime has come out.
What?
Came out last year in November, starring Douglas Scott. If you listeners haven't checked them out, we've talked about Douglas Scott in the Mission Impossible 2 episode on Uncle Cham's podcast last August. Love him, but damn, and it's okay. You have to help me here, Ewan. BritBox original?
Oh,
what's a BritBox original?
So
it doesn't sound real.
BritBox is somehow it's not died off yet. BritBox is a sort of collaboration between the BBC and ITV and Channel 4 and a couple other stations that have basically said, hello, you know that TV show that you've probably got a box set of because they're all in the charity shop for 50p? And you know all the programming we do that is free on ITV Hub and BBC iPlayer and 4OD? How about you pay for that now? They've not gotten rid of the services that you can stream these products for free on, but they've taken stuff like Peep Show, for instance. It's on Channel 4. I've got the box set behind me, but for the low price of like $9.99 a month, you could watch it as well, which is silly. But like all streaming services, they're now making originals. They rebooted Spitting Image, which was like a puppet show from the 80s, a political commentary satire thing. Fantastic in the 80s. The adaptation they have done is not the best. It's terrible. And the other big project that they were working on at the time was that they'd announced an adaptation of Irvine Welsh's Filth, Crime even, because Sky asked him to produce Creation Stories, which was an adaptation that he wrote, and it wasn't the best, and they got cold feet or something. Jeez. And then off he went to BritBox. Knowing that it's a BritBox project, I now have little confidence in it. Yeah. But I can get a free trial through Prime. Or I can pay $2.99 for 12 months, which to me is $2.99 too much.
Wait, $2.99 for 12 months is it's a bargain if you actually care about what's...
They're really trying to pull people in. It's like, you should use this, it's really good. And everyone's going, it's not.
Yeah, doesn't look too promising, honestly. Even though it's directed by James Strong, whose name I didn't... Like, it rang a bell. He's directed quite a bit of Broadchurch, and he's also directed 2 of the best episodes of 11/22/63, the Stephen King adaptation. So, you know, maybe it's not something to dismiss, but also I wouldn't watch it.
It's something I'm going to watch and pitch on the Trello card. So we know there'll be a review out of it on Clapper soon.
I don't think anyone's clamoring to take it up, so, you know.
Look, nobody was clamoring for Sonic the Hedgehog 2, but I reserved it.
Which is shocking. It is very shocking.
Ridiculous.
But yeah, personally speaking, I have to completely agree with what you both said. Again, it's like an echo chamber in a way. But that's always a good sign. The book is
That's what podcasts are for.
That's true, true. The book is better, truly, truly, truly better. I have to say, again, like, you have become Ewan, like, one of the key influences for me to get good reading from.
I'm
Because
so
last
sorry.
year you were like, one of my favorite books, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, and I read it and I loved it. And this year, like, Filth, one of my favorite books, loved it. So it's like, it's just it
I
keeps
sense a
going.
common theme.
It is a common theme. You're 2 for 2. You need a third one
2
next
for 2.
year.
Oh,
One of your
fair.
favorite books, and if it goes bad, end of the podcast, we're canceling.
That's it. Pull the plug.
That's it.
Decommissioned. Jack's been on the phone. We've got to stop.
This was supposed to be the best one yet. We do Pride and Prejudice, probably.
Sorry, I'm looking at my shelf to see what I can recommend next.
Well, while you're looking, this is it for this episode of the Death by Adaptation podcast. Thank you very much for listening, everyone. But before we go out, Cordero and Ewan, where can the lovely listeners find you online? Why don't you go first, Cordero?
I'm on Letterboxd. You can just find me on
Yes.
there.
Yes, following,
enjoy it.
guys.
Follow
Following.
me.
It's long reviews. Not enough people write long reviews. Barely anyone actually reads them. So,
That's the
support
saddest part of it.
that's the sad part. It's like, support people who actually care about writing. Please.
Oh, thank you,
Ewan,
my heart.
Yeah, we try. We're a dying breed, all of us, but we try. Ewan, how about you? Your favorite part? You know it. The listeners love it. It's the favorite segment.
I don't get why. Right. You can get me on Twitter.
Pain and suffering,
you can
They
get
crave
me on.
it. We've lost him. We've lost him.
You can. Oh, you know what? You're not having it this week. No, you can get me on.
They cannot find you this week online. You have to wait
Good
2
luck.
weeks to find it.
No, they can get me on Letterboxd and Twitter at Ewan Gleadow. EWANGLEADOW. And they can also find my writing on. Are we ready for the big haul? You can get me on Cult Following, Northern Lights, The Geek Show, Narc Magazine, Clapper, Horrorwood, Any Volume, Spotlight, Newcastle World, Spark, Sunderland, Daily Star, Daily Mirror, and Letterboxd. The man doesn't stop. I work every day. I've been told that's not healthy. I work every day.
Tireless for now, very tired probably in the future.
I mean, to be fair, when I was talking to you before we started, when I was seeing black spots on my vision, I should probably have a nap.
Yeah, you're a shark. Like, if you slow down, you're gonna.
I've got to keep moving. I'm like a shark or Bob Dylan. If I stop, I die. Like, that's it.
Never stop, Bob.
Never stop, Bob. You've got another tour of the UK to do, pal.
Well, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Nihura97, and there you can find my linktree/enjoy the movies, which has links to all of my videos on YouTube and Vimeo, my short films, my portfolio, my IMDb page, and of course everything related to the Death by Adaptation podcast, which you can also follow on Twitter and Instagram. Twitter, just Death by Adaptation pod. No, Death by Adaptation, jeez. And Instagram, Death by Adaptation pod. As you all know, we're not on TikTok anymore because we got banned. And I also discovered why.
What? Sorry, hang on. We had a TikTok. I don't use the TikTok. I don't get it. I didn't know we had one.
We had a TikTok. We got banned because the show is called Death by Adaptation. And the word death is censored on TikTok. And every time I put a new episode out, I was like, this is a Death by Adaptation podcast. And they were like, no, banned. It just crashed. No, don't do it.
Jesus.
Another reason for me to not download that.
It is for children. That's why it is for
I've
children.
only just worked out how to do on my phone to get the camera on. I can actually... I can actually... So
it's
if
like watching a grandpa using the phone.
I didn't know what my phone number was until like 5 months ago.
Oh my god! No.
People would ask me for my phone number. I'd be like, I really don't know, and I would have to get like someone to text me my phone number. I didn't realize if you click the phone and you go to contacts, you got a card now.
Yep.
Amazing.
Easy peasy.
But if I tap the back button, it actually... Oh, no, it didn't do it anymore. No, it didn't work, but it's meant to bring up the camera. I don't know.
Lovely to see technology's working as always.
My
in
Twitter
our favor.
updated, and I don't like it. And I emailed twitter.com, and they haven't changed it back yet.
You're verified, so you're one of the important figures.
Yeah, they should get back to me within like 3 minutes.
Truly.
Otherwise, I'll deplatform myself.
I mean, Elon Musk is not even buying it anymore, apparently. So
Oh no, that's gone through. I think.
Has it?
Or is it? I don't know. It's been like a back and forth. It's a bit like Ross and Rachel are friends, isn't it?
It's like, I don't care. It's like I don't like this season of the sitcom. Just cancel it. Cancel it for all I care.
I don't like it. I'm not the main character.
But yes, thank you very much as always for listening. Remember to leave a like, 5 stars, all of that good stuff, and follow us for more. Because in 2 weeks' time, we are talking about something a bit different, something lighter, to cleanse the palate after all of this filth. We are talking about Edith Wharton's The Age of Innocence and the 1993 Martin Scorsese adaptation. So stay tuned for that one, and we hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.
I keep forgetting this isn't a video podcast.